Welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops and Detroit Bad Boys, a former D1 hooper and high school coach, current teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
And me, Omari Sacco for the second, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And I got a question about if we're going to add something to that in just a second. But first, have to shout out our guy, Wes Davenport. Always blessed to be joined by him, our producer. And I got to give him some love. Him and Jack Kelly over at Detroit Bad Boys are doing weekly Thursday night, 8 p.m. Eastern, DBB lives over on YouTube. They did their first one last Thursday. It was incredible. These 2 guys are rising stars. Wes, Jack Kelly, shout those guys out. So make sure you turn into those every Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern. But Omari, is it off-season O yet?
We're getting close. That's like I have to wake up and feel like it's off-season. I feel like there's always a wind-down period where you go like 2 weeks if I'm covering a game, but then it's like, okay, I guess it's actually the off-season now, so I can do it. And, I also don't like change my name to off-season over. There's like news going on because it's like, well, like I'm still working. Like off-season O doesn't work, like off-season O chills, but I'm working. So I got to wait till the vibe is right. So I don't know when that's going to be. But off-season O shall return as he always does every off-season. And like I said last week, he doesn't arrive. He just arrives. He's not announced. He just arrived. So one day you'll wake up, it'll be off season though. But
you put that on Twitter, man. You put that on Twitter when I was asking for it, and I was like, man, Omari just brings out these lines. When you changed it last season, I was like, is this Omari? What's going on? Did somebody get a hold of his account? This is crazy. Why does it say off season though? Anytime I get so used, I don't know if this happens to you. I get so used to the image and the name, like the Twitter hand, that if somebody changes it, it just throws me off. If it's somebody, like if you were to change your Twitter picture, it would throw me off. So I don't know if anybody else is like that. So when you switched it to off-season O last year, it took me a while. Like mentally, it took me a little while to figure it out. So I'm very anxiously awaiting to wake up on a random Thursday, and we have arrived with off-season O.
Yeah, we will see. I don't want to yank people back and forth and go back from off-season O to Omari Sacco, depending on what's happening in the news cycle. So, it might be a while. We'll see. They have a coaching search. You got some draft stuff coming up. So it may not feel like the real off-season for a few months. So we'll see. I think last year I didn't do it until probably after Summer League, honestly. It was just like, okay, I woke up one day and then it was like, okay, I got 6 weeks of nothing happening. So, it's off-season, no season. So we'll see. I might do it early, I might do it late. It's just a vibe thing.
So I think that was probably why it was the first time I saw it, because the first year I was around, that offseason between year 1 and year 2 was extremely condensed because they were trying to make up for time from COVID and all of that. So essentially it was NBA Finals and right into the draft and free agency and Summer League and right into the next year. So I think last year was the first time I saw it. We did get a new rating and review on Apple. I want to shout on Spotify, Omari, we're at like 188 reviews, man, or ratings. So if you want to give us a rating, if you've been waiting, now is the time, man. It would be incredible to hit 200 ratings before we hit even 65 episodes of the podcast. Obviously, Apple, they're coming in as well. But we got this review, and it says, this show is a bucket, all uppercase bucket, from Harry Mula. Killer analysis hosted by a duo with a great rapport. It blows my mind that everybody mentions the rapport and the chemistry. Since moving back to Michigan, they have supplemented my Pistons intake, and I couldn't be happier to have discovered this show. Easy 5 stars, a must-listen for Pistons fan, and a show to look up when it comes to team coverage. Hope I can get to the next live show. Absolutely. Please come join us the next time we do that. But again, as always, thank you for the review.
This show is a bucket. I like the bucket terminology here. No, thank you for the review. Definitely means a lot that people sit down and, type up these paragraphs, expressing support, basically. I mean, it's literally just me and Bryce sitting down every week, as 2 buddies who watch hoops. And, I'm glad that vibe comes across to the other side. So, again, we always appreciate the love, that people show that keeps us going. So, feel free to keep that going if you so please.
Definitely gives us energy. Omari, we're going to revisit the preseason expectations and predictions that we had for this season. In just
this is going to be rough. Some of these are way off. So.
Yeah. We're gonna get some critiques. We got some when we did it, and one of them particularly is rightfully so as the season played out. But first, we do have to update the coaching search. I text you this. We talked about it. I was like, I don't want to like dive into this for 20 minutes every episode because there's a lot of insights, especially with coaches we don't have. But that has been reported, quote unquote, Chris Quinn, Charles Lee, Kevin Ollie, a few names that it sounds like are coming in for interviews with the Pistons. I know you haven't been able to substantiate any of this stuff necessarily, but just in terms of those names, what are you thinking? Because Twitter obviously had a quick reaction. It seemed like there was a very negative reaction to Kevin Ollie, a very positive reaction to Chris Quinn. Charles Lee, it seems like Ime is the name that I feel like a lot of people really want. But what were kind of your thoughts? I know some of these are names you've already written about.
Yeah, I was off this past weekend. I had a couple of, birthday parties to people close to me. So I, turned the phone off, proverbial phone off of actual
people that
off.
are how close to you, Amari?
And, just people who are close to me. And
okay.
We will, I saw the, reports Friday night, so I was off. I didn't follow up and, I didn't confirm anything, but we have no reason to assume that they are not true, given that these were names that I previously reported, last Sunday or Monday, names that were on that list. So first we'll start off with Charles Lee, who has been on the Budenholzer bench for, I believe, 9 years, which is a long time to be a head coach. And, obvious candidate there. You have Kevin Ollie, who I think is an intriguing candidate, just being a UConn. He had a great run, with UConn, and he's been an overtime elite. And I would say his path's probably been a bit more atypical compared to your usual head coach. So, and then Chris Quinn, I think we probably all grew up watching Chris Quinn, noted backup point guard, played on some good teams. And he's been on the Eric Spoelstra bench since 2014. So, again, kind of like Charles Lee, you have a good coach and, one of the top assistants. I think that's a natural marriage for every building team looking to get their guy. So, three, I think very logical names as the Pistons begin to search. And, we'll see how this progresses over the next couple weeks or so.
Okay, I want to get to the other stuff, so I'm not going to add too much. The only thing I want to say with the Kevin Ollie stuff, Omari, is I see one of the negative things is, he got fired from UConn after he won with somebody else's players, and he never got hired again. Omari, he never got hired again because he had the show cause, which essentially makes you unhireable in college basketball. And unless I'm missing something, and this is possible, I didn't take a deep, it was recruiting violations, which everybody in college basketball was doing, and he happened to get caught and get in trouble. And so I'm not saying it's okay, I'm not saying it's right, but I just don't agree with he was unhireable as a quote unquote coach. Yes, he did something wrong, he had to be punished for it, he took it, etc. I'm just saying it's not like he got fired from UConn because he just wasn't winning and then nobody else was willing to hire him because he was such an awful coach. Like, he had recruiting violations that made him unhireable because of the sanctions the NCAA put on him. So I just wanted to throw that. I'm not saying I love the idea of Kevin Ollie as the head coach of the Pistons. I don't even know if I have a great opinion on it, but I just did want to get that out there. But let's get into what we're really here to talk about today, which is kind of putting a cap. This will probably be the last time we really put a bow on the season for the Pistons. And so we're going to go by player. Killian Hayes, we're going to start with, Omari. Our Pulse projected stat line, which I think was a combination, the average between our two predictions, was 8.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, 5 assists, and 2.5 3-point attempts. Killian Hayes actually finished the year over 10 points a game, just under 3 rebounds, 6.2 assists, and had just under 4 3-point attempts per game, Omari, but just 28%. So what do you think overall? Where did we miss? Where did we get it right? And what do you think about Killian Hayes' season?
I would say we definitely missed on the 3-point attempts per game. We assumed like 2.5, which, I think coming into the year seemed pretty reasonable. Which, again, I guess that was actually, he had taken 2.5 the season before, so we didn't necessarily predict an increase. We just saw, I believe, an increase in percentage. And the percentage was basically the same, but his attempts did go up, to a career high, almost 4. I think he took 2.8 as a rookie. So, some of that was probably just, we assumed like less minutes, like with Cade playing. I think we just assumed, well, if Killian's only playing like maybe like 20 a night, with Caden Ivey and Defoe, that, if he's taking more per minute, he's probably not going to average more overall. And I think some of the injuries, like especially when we get into Duran and whatnot as well, some players just end up playing more minutes or having bigger roles than we could have predicted, simply because of the injuries. So back to Killian, I think he was largely the same player he was last season, save for like that hot streak he had for like 4 or 5 weeks where, he shot like 37% from three, maybe like 44% overall. And, the numbers were a lot healthier for what you want to see from that position. But, I think certainly Killian just ended up playing a lot more minutes than we both probably expected. And I think his numbers, especially the 3-point volume, just reflects that he did average more minutes than he did last season.
I wonder what his numbers would be if you take out that hot stretch. As much as we want to buy into the hot stretch he had, I wonder what the numbers are if you remove that, because I think the biggest thing with Killian still is the overall field goal percentage, right? He's never shot over 40% from the field, Omari. And I know a lot of that has to do with the low 3-point percentage, but even his 2-point percentage for his career is just 43%. So I think moving forward, that's a big thing with Killian Hayes he's going to have to figure out is, and we've talked about this from, even his rookie season, but now we have a much larger sample from Killian. He's played 168 games. He's played almost 4,500 minutes. Like, we've had enough of a sample to see. He's got to be able to finish. I'm interested to see. I think the one thing we saw improve, and probably why the points per game went up, was that little mid-range pull-up jumper. 8 to 12 feet is where he seems to get comfortable. But anything else inside of the three-point line just isn't very good. The three-point, is still under 30%. I think, the defense, I don't know. I think he's a good defender. At times, I feel like we overrate him a little bit. Like, I don't think he's some elite perimeter defender. So I still want to see him come back next year. I still think he can be a good second unit point guard. Obviously, it's a make or break season for him. What do you really think? Was it just the bigger opportunity? Is that contributed to maybe the numbers being a little bit bigger than what we expected?
I think it's the bigger opportunity. He played 2,100 minutes this past season. His previous high was his sophomore season. Well, for all these, his previous high was his sophomore season because he only played, 26 games as a rookie. But he played 500 more minutes last season. And even just accounting for like per 100. So like just not even accounting for the fact that he played more minutes, but he was taking more shots overall. He took more 3-pointers. He also took more 2-pointers, and he got to the line slightly more as well. So overall, we just saw a pretty uniform increase in minutes and volume for Killian last season. And you mentioned that dribble pull-up, which I think really kind of helps him find his comfort level a lot of nights, just to see a couple shots fall. And you mentioned the hot streak. What would the numbers be if he didn't have that hot streak? Without that 5-week stretch, and I know it sounds reductive to say, well, you removed the players' best games and they were actually worse than they were last year. But you basically have this kind of 5-week like oasis, I would say, for Killian, where the numbers are just good, right? Like 36, 37% from three, like 44% overall, still passed, took care of the ball at a high level. Defense was good. Just all around good guard. But you remove those 5 weeks and, the numbers kind of fall off of a cliff. Before he had those back-to-back 20 balls at the end of the season, he was I think he was shooting like 16 or 17% from three since the Paris game. Then he also started off the season like really, really ice cold. And, we kind of like cold and hot for Killian, but his baseline has been an inefficient player. It's like that hot streak, but still, even so, was more so like this is what you want to see from him over the course of a year and not just for those 5 weeks, which makes it tough. I would also point out, I'm just looking at the numbers now, he actually shot, his 2-point percentage actually declined this year compared to last year. He hit 45% of his 2-pointers as a sophomore, 42.9% this past season. And, that dribble pull up, like when it went in, it went in, but he also had periods where it just wasn't falling at all. I think my main takeaway from the season is that, we saw him sustain success for longer than a month, really for the first time in his career, and that's a building block. But, over the course of an 82-game season, and he played 76 of them, like he was, one of the key contributors this year, probably one of the leaders in games played, if I had to guess. Like, I doubt there's more than 2 guys who played more games than Killian this past season. He just hasn't been able to sustain that over the course of a year, and I think that really hurts him, just given that it's really hard to make an impact, in the league as a 6'5" guard, just not being able to score the ball consistently. And he's still got to have something that becomes his bread and butter, whether it's getting to the line, whether it's a three ball. Like, he's got to have something he can do every single night and rely on and feel good about it.
I would say the aggressiveness and confidence did increase. Like, I feel like his first 2 years, he missed 1 or 2 shots. He would just stop shooting. I thought we saw games this year where he was able to overcome that. And, sometimes he kept missing shots. Sometimes he made shots. I do think that was a baby step in the right direction. And so to your point, he got more opportunity. And then with those opportunities, he stayed aggressive and more confident, even if it didn't always result in production. Let's move to Isaiah Stewart. Obviously, we didn't get a full year of Isaiah Stewart. We projected 8.5 points, 9 rebounds, 1 block. He actually outscored what we predicted, 11.3 points, a little less, 8.1 rebounds, and then under 1 block per game. He did average 1.4 assists per game. And then I think the big number, Omari, I think we did a total projection of this. I think we did it just spontaneously, so I don't know if we have the numbers, but he went up in terms of 3-point attempts. His rookie year, 0.9. His second year, 0.6. This year, all the way up to 4.1 3-point attempts per game, which was obviously a massive jump and way more than what I would have expected.
So the points per game was definitely thrusted by the 3-point shooting. And I don't know if we initially projected like how many threes he would take per game or the percentage or anything, which kind of feels like a missed opportunity. But he did shoot the 3-ball really well to start the year. I think he was like 38%. Like over the first 35 games or so, and then he kind of went cold and he had a shoulder injury, and the extent that hurt his percentage is kind of tough to say. I think only he really knows that, and he did acknowledge on media day that it probably did have some impact with his percentages declining. Really, I think we were pretty dead on with everything else. He took more threes than we expected, so just him camping out on the perimeter a bit more obviously is going to affect the block numbers. But beyond that, I think it's just pretty clear that he was just a little bit more of a volume shooter than we both predicted, and that led to him averaging a career high 11 points per game.
Yeah, and if you look at the overall field goal percentage, obviously it dipped. But if you look at just the 2-point percentage, that stayed and actually went up a little bit from his second season. So it really was that 3-point percentage just because that was more of his shot attempts than in previous years. I'm encouraged the more I look at the 3-pointers. We saw good stretches. We saw stretches where he missed a bunch but then stayed confident. But for him to increase the number of 3-point attempts the way he did and then still keep it at the percentage that we had seen in previous years, like I wouldn't have been surprised to see it actually be lower. So yes, we need to see another jump. It's going to be talked about all offseason, depending on where he fits with the roster, depending on how the draft and free agency goes. But still, just for him individually as a player, it's going to be about now taking those 4 attempts a game and shooting 35, 36% for an entire season. And I will say his offensive rebounds did go down, but again, that's going to be a product of playing at the 4 and playing with someone like Jalen Duren. Like how many offensive rebounding opportunities are there left whenever you're on the floor with Jalen? So I thought it was overall a good season for Stu. We saw him make some steps. Unfortunately, we didn't get the whole year. And to our next guy, another situation where we barely got to see him play. Cade Cunningham, a guy we don't get to talk a lot about, but we are going to take this time to revisit our preseason expectations for him. We projected 22 points, 6 rebounds, 7 assists. In the 12 games that Cade played, Omari, he scored right under 20 points, 6.6 rebounds, 6 assists. So I have a feeling we would have been right on with Cade.
I think so. I mean, he was playing through shin pain, and clearly, something was going on. Like in preseason, he just looked a lot more tentative than usual. And he had that 4-game heater where he scored I think he averaged 28 points, 50% overall shooting, 8 and 7 assists and rebounds. And you kind of saw him probably getting to that next level that you want to see from him in his sophomore year. But yeah, he played 12 games. He was dealing with a shin injury and kind of just stuff to really make much out of 12 games to begin with, but especially knowing in hindsight that he was hurt during those games, I think kind of drags that down. So hopefully next season, Cade will, have a healthy offseason and we'll be able to more accurately project really him in, it's year 3 next year, but really it's year 2 because he's really only played a season's worth of games so far. So he's really, still needs to get that second season going. So hopefully next year we'll be able to have a lot more to dive into as far as K's projections and what we can expect realistically with him healthy.
Another guy that's had trouble staying healthy is Isaiah Livers. And I think this is one where a lot of guys we under-predicted. Isaiah Livers, I think we over-predicted here. So we projected 8 points per game, 4 rebounds, 1 steal. Isaiah actually ended up at 6.7 points, 2.8 rebounds, and just half a steal a game. Where do you think we missed the boat with Isaiah Livers? What do you think kind of led to him not being quite as productive as maybe what each of us thought coming into the season?
Yeah, I mean, I think wise, we probably both assumed he'd probably be in like the 20 to 25 minutes per game range, and he played 23. Just the 3-point percentage dipping, I think, really kind of hurt him. He went from 42.2% to 36.5 on slightly more attempts, but pretty, even from last year. Why that percentage dip, like, it's kind of hard to say. It could have just been a rhythm thing. He was in and out. Could have just been he was unsustainably hot as a rookie, knocking down 42%. And again, he only played 19 games. So, yeah, if he had played, maybe like 60 games last year, maybe he would have shot 42. Maybe it would have been like 39 or 38, which obviously is still great. And he shot 37 this year, which is still good. So, still a good 3-point shooter. But, yeah, like, he had a bigger sample size and his percentage dipped, 5 or 6 points. So, pretty straightforward there. And that's just one of those things that, he's a young shooter. It's just tough to predict exactly how good or how not good he'll be in that area, but still pretty good, just not as elite as he was at the rookie.
Yeah, and I think for Isaiah Livers, I feel like he does have to be elite shooting the 3 ball. Looking at per 100 possessions between the 2 seasons, again, it was just 19 games. This year, we at least got 52, but, across the board, field goal attempts are essentially the same, 3-point attempts, free throw attempts, all of that. But even his rebounding went down, his assists went down, his steals went down. So his overall points, all of that stuff. It seems like all of the even the offensive and defensive rating went down. It wasn't a major step back, but I guess where it's a disappointment for me, Omari, is I was expecting to see a major step forward. So it's like, okay, if his rookie year was the baseline, then what he did this year is just okay. But I was expecting Isaiah Livers to take a step forward, and instead he took a small step back, or even if you just want to argue, he stayed the same. But I think Isaiah has to be an elite 3-point shooter. I know he does some stuff off the bounce. I don't really think that that's where his value lies. So I'm interested to see going into the offseason, see what you think, how much he plays into this wing position and the changeover coming forward. We're going to talk about Hami here in the next segment. I wonder if they still see Isaiah as like a second unit wing playing into this rotation. Obviously, he's going to be on the roster, but I could see them bringing in some guys where Isaiah isn't really in the rotation next year. If, they say they draft a Brandon Miller, bring in a free agent, you still got Boyan. There's a chance where Livers isn't in the rotation next year. And I thought this was really his chance to kind of solidify that. So I've been a big Livers guy. I'm not like saying I'm done with him, like nothing crazy like that. I feel like it would maybe a little bit of a missed opportunity, but the team may feel different about the season he had.
I think Isaiah Livers, he has a good chance to still play next year. Like, you could play him 2 through 4, just his defensive communication. I think he's a guy who will find ways to stay on the floor as long as that shot's falling. But definitely a big offseason for him because they did him to really lock into that 3-and-D role. And 36.5% solid, but not quite, what you want to see from like a quote-unquote 3-and-D guard. You want to probably see that a few ticks higher, which I think he could do it. He does a big season next year because he'll be a restricted free agent in 2024. Some of the Pistons pick up his club option, which I'm sure they will. And, this team just praises him a lot. Like, he's a really smart, bright guy, and just his ability to organize the defense. I think as the team gets better, his skill set will shine even more. He's probably not a guy you want to, have to cover a heavier load than you want, like most 3-and-D guys. Like, if the team like Kentavious Caldwell Pope, but he's taking, 17 shots, that's probably not a good role for him. So, I think Isaiah will be fine, but he's definitely got to get back to the rhythm he had as a rookie.
All right, we're going to go to a short break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk Marvin Bagley III, Hamidou Diallo, and the 2 biggest misses for Omari and I, the rookies, Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey.
All right, we're back with segment 2, going through our preseason player predictions and how wrong we were on several of them. And this is one we were pretty wrong on, although in defense of us, there's no way we could have really known his role and how it would change coming into the season. So Marvin Bagley III, where we projected 16 points, 8 rebounds, and a block. He averaged 12 points, 6.4 rebounds, and 0.7 blocks. So, Bryce, I'll let you lead off with this one. But there's a lot of stuff I think that happened that really made it impossible to project where Marvin Bagley would fall this year, just from a role standpoint.
I think we thought he was going to start, right? I assume that's where...
Because we did it before. I think we did it before the Boyan trade, right?
We definitely did it. We definitely did it before the Boyan trade. Mm-hmm. And because Boyan wasn't in there. And so I think we thought he was going to start. Obviously, we didn't know they were going to trade for James Wiseman. And this is going to play into a player we talked about a little bit. Even though we were different about what we thought was going to be Jalen Duren's role, I don't think either of us thought Jalen Duren was going to play as many minutes and as big a role and start as many games as what he did. So I think the big miss here for us was just thinking that Marvin Bagley was probably going to get to start at the 5. And I would assume, thinking back to it, he had just got the contract, right? We were sitting in a situation where Troy Weaver had just traded for Marvin Bagley III. He had given him a 3-year, $36 million contract with no team option on year 3. Seemed like he really liked him. And so we're sitting here going, they're going to give this kid a chance. And they may have, right? Again, injuries seem to be as we go through this, I realize even more, Omari, how much this team dealt with injuries. We talk about Cade, but think about all the other injuries we've already talked about, and we haven't even discussed how many games Boyan and Burke said at the end of the season. So, if we wanted to talk big picture record-wise, that plays into it. But real quick, before I let you go, I thought Bagley had a nice end to the season. He played some games that I really liked and was really interested by. So, whatever about the contract, we don't need to get into that. But I'm still somewhat intrigued by Marvin Bagley III, even though we obviously overshot it with this.
I think we had him coming into the year as a starter just with the Boyan trade, before the Boyan trade, and they made a big investment. So it just seemed like he would be a guy who would occupy one of those starting spots. I think we had Isaiah Stewart being like maybe more the floor spacing kind of defensive roamer, of the two in that front court. Bagley playing closer to the rim and more to his strengths. Beyond that, I think the injuries really hurt him. He played 42 games and just ticky-tacky fluke injuries, right? Like he lands on the guy's foot getting back in transition and he, gets caught on the screen or something and he breaks his fingers. Just random, unfortunate stuff. He did play really well, I thought, to the end of the year. I think he shot 9 of 19 from 3 in his last 10 games, which, I don't know if he'll ever be like a volume guy, but, if you're looking at just who can play the 4, of these guys on the roster, I think Bagley probably more natural as a 5, but just because he can drive from the perimeter and because he can shoot, like it kind of helps him, do things that you're probably not going to get from Wiseman or from Duren at the 4. The main issue for him was just Rowe. I mean, Duren, who we'll talk about in a little bit, started, I think 31 games, and that was tough to predict coming in. And, Boyan, all these things, like I just thought Bagley had a really weird season. But when he did actually get consistent into a groove, you could see that he's a talented player. He's a guy, you could start him, bring him off the bench. He's going to be pretty consistent. I feel like he didn't really have just like a lot of outright bad games, right? Like it was always something he was bringing when he was out there. And through all the sort of things working against him, I did think that he had a solid year. The main issue was just, I think, Rowe and then 2, the injuries.
I don't have a whole lot of concerns with bringing all 3 of those bigs back in Duren, Wiseman, Bagley. I think you have to figure out kind of the hierarchy of that and who you're going to prioritize minutes and all that. But again, the theme of this podcast, and we didn't go into, is the injuries, right? And the Pistons in the 3 years that I've watched this team religiously over the past 3 have always dealt with injuries, especially with their big. And, that's just kind of natural, right? Big guys, you have, 7-footers, all this weight, like they're going to get injured, and hopefully not majorly injured, but they roll an ankle, they tweak this, maybe they need a couple games rest. And so I think you can find minutes for all those guys. That's a conversation for when we dive into the offseason a little bit more. A guy that overperformed our expectations was actually Hamidou Diallo. And I think this is where I think we overprojected Isaiah Livers and then maybe underprojected Hami. He had a projected stat line from us of 7 points, 4 rebounds, 1 assist. And he actually came in with 9.3 points per game, 3.5 rebounds, 1 assist. Again, another guy who didn't play a ton of games, especially late because of injury. And I will just say, I feel like this happened because Hamidou Diallo fully accepted his role and who he was as a basketball player in the NBA. He went like a whole month without even attempting a 3-pointer. And I feel like the team also found a nice little role for him in the niche offensively. He can be disruptive defensively, although it's not always like with within the team construct. But I thought Hami had a really good season, kind of reminded everybody like, hey, I'm here and I'm a productive player. And I think it'll be really interesting to see what they do with him this offseason.
Yeah, Hami is really unique. And you mentioned the 3-point shooting. This was a career low for him in 3-point attempts per game, which actually ended up being really good because that's not who he is. Like he also struggles at the line, which is unique for a 6'5" guard. In a lot of ways, offensively, he is more of like an athletic four than he is like a wing, right? Like we kind of talked about him in like this wing category, him being 6'5" and he looks the part, but his best skills are his interior finishing and his rebounding. And the third best skill is just his pure leaping ability, which, of course, gives him a lot of utility in both of those categories. So he's a unique player, and I think it took the Pistons some time to figure out how to best utilize him. But it's also him just, like, buying into his role, right? Like, we saw a lot of opportunities where teams were giving him that three because he wanted Hami to take three. He don't want him getting inside where he's one of the best finishers of any player his size. And, he quickly gets downhill. Like, he's a good cutter. You could even put him in the dunker spot, and feel pretty good about it just because he could out-leap a lot of guys. And he was a lot of fun to watch this season, like really unique. There was a stretch where I think they had like 3 bigs out. And they even played him like some small ball 5. And I mean, you don't want him there like defensively for like the whole game, right? But like even that kind of worked in a sense just because he could, jump up and finish lives. He gets offensive rebounds. He does a lot of big man stuff at 6'5". So we were actually pretty dead on with him. Like we got the assists, we got the rebounds. He averaged slightly more points. And, I think a lot of that was just us not being able to predict the extent that he would give up the 3-ball and just intentionally just get inside and make things happen at the rim. So overall, like I thought he had a good season, but he's also such a unique player that's tough to figure out like his exact value as he goes into unrestricted free agency and how he fits into next year's team.
It would be hard for us to predict for him to have a career year from the field. So, just looking at his seasons, he shot 57% from the field this year. He had never been over 50 in any other season, which is something to take into account moving forward when you start talking about the contract he's going to get and those type of things. Did he fully buy into his role? Is he willing to do that? Was it an outlier year? Those are the things that teams really have to look at. I think what's really important for Hami compared to a lot of guys is who is the new coach. This is where I think the new coach plays into Hami a lot because Hami does. So Isaiah Livers, I feel like, is just your prototypical archetype of a 3-and-D, right? Would you agree? Like he's going to catch and shoot threes and then defend, be a good team defender. And you can almost find a role for him within any offensive and defensive scheme. With Hami, I think it's a little bit different. Are you going to hire a coach who's willing to be and able to be creative with a 6'5" guard / 4-man who you're going to try to short roll with, put in the dunker spot, and defensively is probably best if you just let him hound the other team's best player but not do anything else or try to cause havoc. So I think the coaching decision, not that you should make the coaching decision based on Hami, but I think the coaching decision is huge for Hamidou Diallo just in terms of whether he stays in Detroit or not. He's going to get a contract somewhere no matter what. But I'm just saying, in terms of staying in Detroit, it probably comes down to, yes, money, but also who's the coach and kind of what are their philosophies on both ends of the court.
Because I think the Pistons are, for sure open to bringing Hami back. Like he's just a great fit in the locker room, great guy. Just his role to have like that designated energy player who can come in and just immediately bring life because this team kind of struggled with that at points last season, just not playing with any life. Hami would come in and the game changes. That's a valuable thing to have. It's just, if he were a really strong outside shooter and not just like this sort of unique interior guy, I think that question probably wouldn't be there as much, right? Because you can, I think the issue is also that he is inconsistent defensively. And if he were able to like really, hold down opposing wings defensively, I think that would help, but he doesn't always do that. So, I think just from a priority standpoint, like, he's more of a, like the Pistons have to get like a big swing at free agency or clearly just get like some 3-and-D help. Like, Trey Weaver mentioned that during his availability last week. And I think it's just pretty clear that this team has a need for a big wing who can defend. And that's not Hami. So a lot of that would be dictated by his market, right? Like if he has a good deal elsewhere, he could make $8-9 million. And the Pistons are like, hey, we're trying to sign this other guy who can touch back in a few days. Maybe he's like, all right, I'm just going to go to this other team, which I think could also likely happen. There's also a chance the market is not as strong as he probably hopes. And then the Pistons can take care of business in free agency and then come back and say, we can give you, this, that, for this many years. And he says yes. So it really, to me, it's a coin flip whether or not he comes back. And a lot of that just kind of comes down to what the Pistons are able to get done in free agency first, as far as filling those primary needs.
Yeah, I agree. I want him on a lower contract, which I want Hummy to get paid. I want him to get his money. And so I feel bad saying that, but at the right deal, I think he's a really good 11th, 12th man on a roster for all the things you said, especially the energy when you get into the dog days of the season. Hopefully a season next year where the Pistons are truly competing night in and night out, trying to win games. And he's one of those guys that helps you win a couple games just because he comes in off the bench, takes a charge, gets a block, highlight dunk, and then just energizes the arena. So let's get to the two rookies. I'm sure this is really who everybody's been waiting for, and we're making you wait 35 minutes into the episode to get it. But first, Jalen Duren. I would say I feel like Jalen Duren is my biggest miss in terms of this season. I know we'll talk about Ivy, and maybe people would say it's Ivy, but I feel like I was pretty high on Jaden Ivey when a lot of others weren't. But Jalen Duren, I said nobody was higher on Jalen Duren's long-term ceiling than me, but I don't think I was way too low on his current rookie year ability. So we projected 5.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, 1 block. Jalen Duren obviously averaged 9.1 points, 8.9 rebounds. We were good on the blocks. He didn't even average a block per game. I thought he would spend some time in the G League. I'm an idiot. But Jalen Duren exceeded a lot of expectations, probably not just ours, but obviously a really nice rookie season from the big man out of Memphis.
Yeah, so going back to Bagley, like we, expect he's going to start, and maybe Isaiah Stewart starts, and then it's like, well, where exactly does Jalen Duren fit in? And, I kind of talked about it going into the season. I think what really helped Jalen Duren is that he is the only Jalen Duren on the roster. And I was probably a little bit lower on him playing in the G League than you, which was more of for me, had more to do with the fact that I just didn't think G League reps would help him as much just because he's 6'11", super athletic. You don't see those types in the G League because they're typically NBA ready for a variety of reasons. But again, like Bagley ended up missing part of preseason and then like the first 20 games of the regular season. And now you're pretty thin up front, and Jalen Duren has to play. And the Pistons also fully just let Nerlens Noel just be like that emergency option, which I think coming into the season, I had a feeling that he probably wouldn't play as much as some people probably hoped. But for him to be stacking up the did not plays as he did. It's just one of those things you can't really predict until you get into the year. But what I think the main thrust behind Jalen Duren playing as much as he did is that he was just ready. I mean, he came in, he was immediately the lob catching, offensive rebounding, like nightly threat that he was at Memphis. And defensively, like any rookie big, he has a ways to go. I mean, often the rookie bigs come in and are immediately good, right? Like Mobley, Kessler in the last 2 years, that might be the entire list. And he's the youngest player in the NBA, so you expect him to, not come in and just immediately make an impact on that side of the floor. But just great season for Duren overall. I mean, he was exciting. You saw the flashing upside. You saw the defensive upside. The athleticism, rebounding, like day one has been great. And he also started, I believe, 31 games. He started 31 of his 67 games, which is really tough to predict coming in just with the injuries they had in their front court. So great season for Jalen Duren. I mean, he had a way bigger role than I think a lot of people would have guessed for him coming in. And that really sets him up for a really big year, too.
I just wanted to defend my G League thing real quick because I agree. And I've come to understand even more, like he was going to be such a physical freak even at that level, that he was just going to do that. And people tried to tell me that. My rationale for wanting Duren to get G League minutes was I wanted him to get minutes and I wanted him to get usage because of the ceiling I see from Jalen Duren. I wanted him getting short roll reps. I wanted him getting DHO reps. I wanted the offense not just entirely running through him, but I wanted him to get a lot of usage where he wasn't just simply catching lobs and offensive rebounding. Now, what ended up happening, especially with Cade out and all these other bigs hurt or in Nerlens' case, never playing, he got plenty of minutes and he probably even got more usage than I would have guessed with the Detroit team. Especially, they weren't very good and all these other things. So he got a lot of the reps that I wanted him to get with the Pistons, which is obviously better than him getting him in the G League anyway. So I think it worked out the way I wanted, but that was, I guess, my thought process was I don't want him to come in the league and just be a lob threat, just be a big athletic dude. I think he's more skilled than that. Like, I think he can pass. I think he can dribble. I want him working on his shot. And so he got enough of those reps. And some would argue, like, that's the stuff you do in practice. You don't need needed game reps for it. Like that may be the case as well. So I just wanted to defend that real quick. Overall, I don't know if you agree with this, Omar. I think what made Jalen Duren's rookie season such a success compared to what we projected was just the maturity he had. And I know we've talked about he doesn't like being referred to as the youngest player in the league, but for being the youngest player in the league, he sure showed a lot of maturity, both physically, but even like mentally, emotionally, all of that, just handling the grind of an NBA season.
Yeah, he did. And that's, again, another thing you can't really predict until you get into the year is how a rookie will handle the grind and just the pace of everything that comes with the NBA. But Duren was ready. I mean, just talking to him every day, you would not think that he is as young as he is. And he, very politely reminds the media sometimes, like, I don't necessarily want that to be like my MO, like I'm young. And like I remember I talked to him for Surrey in December, and he said, I don't want it to ever be like we have to slow walk Jalen. Like he wanted to be known for being ready and all that. So it just speaks to his mindset and his readiness and, just his approach to his rookie season that, he will, I would assume he would be second team all rookie. Like once those teams are announced, on out of ballot, I voted for him second team. I voted for Jaden Ivey first team. And we'll talk about Ivey next. But, I thought both of those guys really checked off a lot of the boxes you want to see from them as rookies.
All right, Jaden Ivey, Pulse projected stat line. And this is the one we took the most heat right from day one. I remember the DBB comments.
And rightfully so.
Rightfully so now. 11.5 points per game, 4 rebounds, 3.5 assists. Jaden Ivey ends the season 16.3 points per game, 3.9 rebounds. So we were close on the rebounds, or right at the rebounds, 5.2 assists in 31 minutes and 73 games started. Just an incredible offensive rookie season from Jaden Ivey.
So we had that projected stat line, and people were like, let's look at the other athletic rookies who have played. Like they've, just from a minute standpoint alone and shot attempts, he's going to be way above that. People were like, he's going to average like 15, 16, 17. And it's funny, like after we came out the episode and people were making those points, I was like, we probably did go a little bit too low, right? And we ended up going a lot too low because he averaged 5 more points, assists, like everything was just higher, I think, except the rebounds that we projected for him. Again, I would say Cade got hurt, so that cleared out a lot of minutes for Ivey that may not have been there to begin with. He was a day one starter, but there was never a point in the season where Dwayne Casey was like, Cade and Burks are rolling, or Cade and Hayes are rolling, or whatever. So we're not going to let Ivey close his game out. Like he wasn't benched early too often, if at all. He just kind of got the full go from day one to the very end. And I would say efficiency wise, he probably wasn't really where you want him to be, which, like, he's a rookie guard. You expect that. 41.6% overall is not good for a guard who gets downhill. But I think that was offset by better than expected shooting, where he was shot 34%. And I think after January 1st, that crawled up to like 36-something%, which is like really, really healthy for a guard who really didn't shoot the ball that well at all in college. Like that was probably the biggest area of improvement that we saw compared to college, where he just attacked the game differently. Like he would sometimes, especially toward the end, open up games by just shooting threes, right? And he gets a couple to fall, and now he gets a run right to the rim the rest of the night, because defense have to come all the way up on him. And just, good rookie season. The efficiency again wasn't there, but just the playmaking growth, shooting growth, like I think we saw enough to say he's got a pretty high ceiling ahead of him.
I think what happened for us is looking at what we projected for the team. We projected them to only score 105 points per game, and they actually scored 110, which was still 29th in the league. So we almost we projected them to like be not historically bad, but over this decade of scoring or whatever, really bad. And so I think we overcompensated I remember having a conversation like, we got to make sure we don't project them to have, average 130 points per game. And so I think we, especially on the points, we went under. Assists wise, I don't feel bad about only projecting 3.5 assists because, again, I think I've been screaming from the rooftops that he was a good passer. It was underrated and people were like crushing that way too much. The idea was that Cade Cunningham was going to be averaging 6, 7, 8 assists a game and that Jaden Ivey wouldn't have the ball in his hands quite as much. So I'm not even going to try to defend that because I feel very comfortable about where I was with Jaden Ivey as a passer. And I'm just glad that it showcased itself in the NBA. obviously with the scoring, we were low in general. Like we were obviously wrong, but I think we like overcompensated by being like, we can't project him to score too many points as a team. And so I think for a lot of players, other than like Marvin Bagley, and that's the other thing. So I think we were very high on Marvin Bagley's scoring. We didn't talk about Sadiq Bey because obviously he got traded. We were pretty high on Sadiq Bey's scoring and then Cade. So I think what we had was Cade at like 20 a game, 22, Sadiq and Bagley at 16 or at 18. So it was like, is there room for another guy to average 16 or 18 points a game? So again, I know I'm trying to defend us. We were wrong. I get it. You know, looking back, it was foolish, but that's where our mindsets were, I think, whenever trying to project this.
And I'll also add that there was just offensive inflation as a whole over this past season where like 105 sounds really low, right? Until you consider that they averaged like 104.8 last season, points per game. And you can look at the numbers and you will see that the points that the Pistons averaged, which was 109, right? That would have been closer to 20 of overall the season before than it was this past season. And like the worst team in the NBA last season scored 5 more points per game than the season before. So there was just this overall increase in offensive production that we couldn't really predict coming into the year. And I also factored into several guys, I think, averaging more points than we expected because just, obviously with Cade, being cleared out and Bogey coming in and, scoring 22, I think kind of replaced a lot of what we expected from Cade. But overall, I think the Pistons, even the worst team scored more points this past season than they did 2 years ago. So you just kind of count for like an overall 5 points per game increase average for like the entire NBA. Like that's a lot of extra production for the entire league as a whole. But even so, I think even just looking at the fact that Ivy was probably going to average around 20, maybe 25, 30 minutes a game, which is not tough to project. Like Killian never really played that many. So you have Killian and Cade. So I'm going to use left over for Ivy. Just like a lot of noise, I think makes it tough to come in. But even so, 11.5 is too low. Probably should have been in like the 13 to 14 range. So it just speaks, I think, to Ivy as a whole, just how consistent he became, late in the year. And obviously to the shooting that, we kind of talked about previously, that was better than we both expected.
I was going to say, to finish this off, to stop like kind of protecting ourselves and to give the love to Jaden Ivey, which is what he deserves. The 3-point shooting, which you already mentioned, one, the volume was more than what I would have guessed, and the efficiency at 34%. I'm sorry. I think if he's a 34, 35% 3-point shooter at, 7.4 attempts per 100 possessions, I think that's plenty good for him to play on, off ball, whatever role you need him to. So if he can do that, maybe improve just a little bit, you're good. And then where he really got better than what I expected was in the mid-range. I talked about this coming into the season was he was not very good in the mid-range. Now, the runner floater never came around, but just the true mid-range pull-up, he improved a ton in his rookie season, especially compared to his sophomore year at Purdue. So that's where Jaden Ivey deserves all the credit for exceeding what our expectations were, albeit they being lower than what they should have been to start with. Just a really incredible rookie season from Ivy. Very excited to continue to talk about him this offseason, how he fits with Cade, and as we start to look about rounding out this roster. But we do need to go ahead and go to a short break. And when we come back, we're actually going to talk the NBA in general. The play-in games have happened. The first games of the playoffs, the true playoffs have started, round 1 games. So we're going to dive into some of the ones we saw, some of the storylines, how they may apply to our Detroit Pistons. We'll get into all of that after this short break.
All right, we are back with our final segment, and we're going to get into some playoff action, talk about the league as a whole. First, I will acknowledge I had a busy weekend, so I didn't watch those basketballs I planned on watching. But Bryce, I'm going to ask you, did you watch Lakers Grizzlies yesterday?
I am him. I absolutely did. Austin Reeves is like a phenomenon right now. I had somebody tweet me that video of him, I think it was after he like snaked the ball screen, hit the mid-range jumper, and then he's screaming, I am him, was I'm not on Reddit, but it was like the #1 video on Reddit /all or what. I don't know what that means, but it sounds like it's really popular. So yes, to answer your question, I did watch the majority of that game.
It was a good game. I was like just talking to people while I was watching the game, and I was curious like how Memphis would be able to respond to AD, because it's like, all right, you don't have Steven Adams, you don't have Brandon Clark, and like AD is AD, right? So, he's probably just going to feast, and he did. He had 7 blocks. But, again, like I think what's kind of fun, about that game is one, like, okay, you have LeBron and AD, but like Austin Reeves and Rui Hachimura ended up being the guys to kind of carry them to victory. And like one, just like shout out to like that trade deadline with the Lakers had when they turned Westbrook, and they just completely fleshed out their roster from like a depth standpoint, and they turned a weakness into a strength. And we on this pod we talk a lot about just like roles and what guys can feel like X and Y when you are competing, and just have a guy who could heat up like a Rui Hachimura, who he kind of reminds me of Sadiq Bey in some ways, like just being sort of like a big, bulky forward. He's like really stiff defensively. Like you could just see like guys could just kind of like run right past him. He's not like the most flexible guy, but just being able to heat up from three and just do that type of thing. And Sadiq, he's been playing pretty well for Atlanta too. Not to rub the knife in any Pistons fans who.
No, we need to talk about that though.
Don't like that trade, but like that, I think that is a very. Like those guys could win you games. Like just an Austin Reeves, a guy who could like play make and like get hot from three. And look at the Pistons, and that actually kind of reminded me of like Boogie and Burks a little bit. Like like the Pistons won 17 games, and it's like you don't. It's like like why do you keep these guys? But just having players who can heat up and make plays like a playoff game, like could win you a game. And I think that's what the Pistons were thinking when they held on to Boogie and Burks this past offseason. It's like, or this past trade deadline. It's like these guys could win us games. Like when we get to that point, and you need those types of shot makers. Like LeBron was. I don't know how many points he had in the fourth quarter, but he didn't do a whole lot, and they still won.
Yeah, it's all about roles, right? I mean, I think that's the thing. If Bojan's your number one option, you're probably not a playoff team. But if Bojan is your fourth option, like that's incredible. Are you kidding me? If the Pistons are able to, however they work this roster and have Bojan as their fourth option next year, whether as a starter coming off the bench, that's huge. So first, I thought it was incredible that Austin Reeves is literally running the Lakers half-court offense to close out that game. Like they were putting the ball in Austin Reeves' hands, and he was going crazy. Now, to further make this worse for the Pistons, Detroit wanted to draft him. Detroit tried to draft him in the second round, and him and his agent were like, no, we're good. They would rather go into undrafted free agency and sign with the Lakers, and obviously that's worked out for Austin and them, which when I heard that story, I was like, holy crap, like this is crazy that this stuff really happens, and how good would Austin Reeves be with the Detroit Pistons. But what the Lakers did at the deadline finally was they put a roster around LeBron and AD that makes sense. I mean, even someone like Jared Vanderbilt, they started Jared Vanderbilt on John Morant in this game. And so they have some guys that can knock down shots, and like the roster makes sense now. And then to Sadiq Omari, I've watched some Hawks games, the playing games, all that. Sadiq is in a role where Sadiq needs to be, right? Like you watch him, and I think like 2/3 of his attempts are three-pointers, catch and shoot 3-point attempts. It gives him more energy on the defensive end where he's still not great, but he can hold up at times. And so that's what the NBA is about. That's when I feel like you really turn a corner as a team, is when all these guys fall into place in terms of the hierarchy of number one option, number two option, number three option, etc. And guys can really star in their role. And that's what we've seen from some of these teams.
Playoffs in a lot of ways is just a different game from the regular season. You really see how just having players who can fill certain roles or archetypes can really pay off. Like you mentioned, Jared Vanderbilt, guarding Ja, which, I think what helps with that is that, one, Jared Vanderbilt's an extremely mobile, big, who can defend multiple positions, but also knowing that Ja likes to get downhill probably makes it a little bit easier to put a big on him, knowing that you're probably going to be playing, essentially job coverage on a guy like that anyway. Like if Ja takes 5-6 threes and, even if he hits a few of them, like you could live with that, knowing that he's not going to do that every single night. Like I look at Isaiah Stewart, right? A guy who, probably is wanted to more of a role player type of thing, but you could probably put Isaiah Stewart on like a small, quick guard like that in the playoffs and feel okay. Again, like De'Aaron Fox never got, I think he had, 3 threes in like the second half or 4 or whatever, but he's a non-shooter, right? So you could probably stick a big on him and feel somewhat big about it, even though he's so fast. So a lot of bigs probably get blitzed. But, I thought that was a good game. Bryce, what else kind of stood out to you over this weekend from what games you were able to watch? I know you got stuff going on too, so I don't know how much you're able to actually sit down and watch this past weekend.
Yeah, I was working, so I tried to catch and spend some time with the family, but I caught games here. I don't know if you saw this one, but I watched the Knicks and the Cavs game, and Jalen Brunson and Donovan Mitchell were a lot of fun just going back and forth at each other. And specifically, Jalen Brunson looked really, really good in this game. He was balling out. And it made me I couldn't help but think is those two guys are balling. James Harden has a good game. De'Aaron Fox goes crazy against the Warriors. Like everybody, I always relate this stuff back to the Pistons, and everybody's like, it's a wing league. It's a wing league. It's a wing league. And I'm like, is it only a wing league? Because like I'm watching a bunch of little dudes, I didn't mention Steph Curry, go absolutely crazy. So again, not to like turn this into the Scoot versus Brandon Miller conversation, but is somebody that if Scoot is as good as what people think, just because he's 6'2", are you telling me he can't win in the playoffs? Because these little dudes, and I realize we're not talking about like 5'10" guys, we're talking about 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", but these little dudes are balling and they're controlling the game still, Omari. I mean, John Morant even, I know he's a freak athlete, but that's what I'm saying is like, I don't know that it's only a wing league, I guess, as I was watching these games.
I think it's like you could win with guards. It's more so like what's the ceiling for those types of teams. I'd be curious to see how deep the Cavs and the Knicks are able to get, just given, like, one, Brunson has exceeded all expectations. And the leap he's had this past season was probably bigger than even, like, maybe his most prominent fans could even predict, right? Coming to, a team and you're essentially, you could debate whether he or Render are, like, the number one option. But, like, really, they're both number one options, right? And, I think of the two, Brunson probably gives you a little bit more just from like a playmaking standpoint. So you can win with those types of players. I would be curious to see, like, once you get to like, you're playing like a Philly or like a Milwaukee or one of those teams, just like how well you hold up. Cleveland did not rebound very well. Does that front court, hold up against like an Embiid or a Giannis and Brick? Like what could happen at that point? And then can you survive? One of those guards having an off night, which is going to happen at some point. And when that happens, like, I think what hurts small guards is if you're not hitting shots, that a lot of your value just kind of falls off of the cliff, right? Where if you're a wing or a big, at least you could still add a lot on defense. That can kind of help you get to like that next point. Like AD, if he did have a great offensive night, like what he did defensively just was like game-changing stuff. So I think it just hurts guards more in the playoffs when you have an off night because you can't really bring a lot more, and like that ceiling just tends to be a little bit lower.
No, I was gonna say like the guards can still make an impact offensively, right? Like It's definitely still a wing league on defense. I think what's hard is like, it's a wing league because of guys like LeBron, Giannis, Kate, like. How many of those guys are coming through the NBA, though? Like, how often are you going to get those type of players? And I guess if you think you're only winning championships with those guys, then I don't know what you do. You just draft one every single year and hope that you eventually hit. I'm not sure. So I did also want to mention, I couldn't help but watch the Oklahoma City Thunder, and I realized that they won their first play-in game and then lost the second one, so they're not in the playoffs, but obviously a successful year for the Thunder. And I'm watching them play SGA, Josh Giddey, and Jalen Williams, all guys who can do things with the ball in their hands, and I couldn't help but think about the Pistons. And here's why, Omari. Those three guys, SGA only takes 2.5 threes a game at 35%. Giddey takes 3.1 at 33%, and Jalen Williams only takes 2.8 at 36%. Another guy on the floor with them was Lou Dort, who takes 5.5 a game, but just 33%. So my point here is, again, trying to think, okay, if they land number 2 and they do draft Scoot, is there enough shooting? Take away everything else. Is there enough shooting to play Scoot, Ivy, and Cade together? And I'm like, the Thunder are making it work. And I realized they didn't make a playoff run, but this is a young team that played really well, won a lot of games, won a play-in game, and like they made it work. And so I think there's ways to make these things work. Like, I don't think everybody on the floor has to be a 38, 42% three-point shooter. Certain guys do to fill their roles. I watched the Thunder and I watched them use Josh Giddey as a ball screen short role player. I watched the Heat play and they're using Jimmy Butler as a ball screener and short role player. And I'm like, okay, can we put the ball in Scoot Henderson's hands and then Cade screen, short rolls, draws help, kicks to Ivy. Ivy knocks down a shot or attacks on the second side. I'm just like, I think you can make these things work. And even watching these teams play in the playoffs, I'm like, there's creative offensive schemes to play guys like this together.
Yeah, and I think OKC is a great example of just, how the Pistons can kind of go about this where, like, just like from a big man standpoint, like Chet was going to be their best big and he ended up missing the whole year. So you don't really have the type of versatile front court play you see from a lot of playoff teams, right? Like, it's very guard driven. And as you mentioned, the guards don't even really shoot as well as he would want. Like Giddey's a big guard, gives you playmaking, rebounding. doesn't give you any floor space to shade. He's like a mid-range, like paint specialist, right? Like he's got one of the most unique games in the entire league. So, I think the playoffs are fun because you could kind of get a better sense of like how certain roster, like where their ceilings are, right? I think if you're the Pistons, you have Cade, you have Ivy, you might add Scoot. You look at, well, how can these guys work? And it does put pressure on the coaching search, maybe to find, a coach who can be, really flexible in their lineups, know how to position guys for success. One thing I like about Cade is that, like, he can do everything. Like, he could shoot, like he could post up back to the basket. So I think just from a playoff standpoint, it would be really hard for teams to kind of scheme Cade off of the floor. And that probably gives you a lot of lineup versatility. So we'll see. I think what's really fun about the NBA now is just you have a lot of good teams and they are doing different things, right? It's not, 5 years ago where you probably had 2 teams that could win it. Like you probably have 8 teams that could get hot and like make a really deep run. Some of those teams are really guard-based. Some of those teams are big-based. You have the Clippers where all their talent is really – and Paul George is out, but it's just like those 2 wings, right? And you even saw during the regular season, they struggled from a playmaking standpoint. They had to do some things to kind of get more playmaking in there. So, the playoffs are fun, man. Like, I'm glad we kind of got past the season. I'm glad we're watching some high-stakes basketball. And a lot of the stuff I think will – be informative for the Pistons, too, as they kind of navigate their next steps and trying to get into that mix this time next year.
I think it'll be interesting because right now I'm here saying like, hey, the guards are dominating, but we're early in the playoffs, right? And so we may see it play out. What you're saying is, well, eventually, Jalen Brunson is capped and Trae Young is capped and Steph Curry's capped, and we see all these wingy teams make it into the finals in the NBA. And then I think as Pistons fans, you can watch this. One, you get a kind of a reminder of what real NBA basketball looks like after watching a Detroit team that was hindered all year long. But also, okay, this is what it's going to take, Oklahoma City Thunder, to get to the play-in game. Like, this is what you got to be able to do. This is what it takes to get to a conference finals. This is what it takes to win an NBA championship. In my opinion, then this is maybe something for a discussion for another day, and it is because we're going to have to wrap it up here, do you have to build the championship structure right now? Or can you just worry about getting better, taking the next step? Okay, let's get to the play-in game. All right, now we're in the play-in game. Why did it not work? Okay, let's maneuver the roster. Now we're getting to the conference finals. Okay, now what do we have to make a move to do to get to a championship? Where I don't know that you have to build the championship roster right now where just everything fits perfectly. I don't know. I think there's some back and forth on that discussion. But again, that's for another day. I think next week we're going to get back into some NBA draft talk in general, talk about the Pistons and a bunch of prospects. We'll still talk about the playoffs, I'm sure, at some point throughout that episode. But another good one this week, Omari. We got up early on a Monday morning to do this one. But always, I get a little bit of coffee, get to see you and Wes's smiling faces, and I get energized to record the pod. So I had a blast. I hope our listeners did. Leave us a rating and a review. Omari, take it home, my guy.
Yeah, I always wake up. I try to give up coffee this year. I probably only have 1 cup of coffee, so I wake up with my morning black tea. And this is a good way to start the day. This is it's 8:43 Monday morning. This is what we do for you all. Like Bryce has a full work day ahead of him. And I do not because, it's the off season. So, I have half a work day ahead of me to write the story. But regardless, always a blast to do this first thing in the morning. And I will close this out. Big thanks to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our executive producer, Anjanette Delgado, and our sports editor, Kirkland Crawford. Also, shout out to Wes Davenport, as always. And we will talk to you all next week.